as close as I can to that, gives me a little bit of perspective, and it seems to me, from my perspective, the Canadian system is actually serving the bulk of the people. Nobody goes without health care if they want it. The problem, it seems to me, with the Canadian system is that it's tied into the pharmaceutical industry, so that they get the whole of the medical establishment is plugged into through the same educational system that the Americans have, which is to solve most problems, you address it with drugs, with pharmaceutical drugs. And those drugs, that's the bulk of the problem, is the pharmaceutical industry is running the healthcare system. If we get in this country any kind of single-payer system, which is not a part of Obama's plan, we're going to leave essentially the pharmaceutical industry in charge. And there's just a tremendous amount of material on the pharmaceutical industry and the corruption. There's one book I just finished reading. It's by a member of Parliament. It's called Death by Prescription. It's by a fellow named Young. He's a member of Parliament. And it tells the story of the death of his daughter through via a drug called Prepulsid, which is used for vomiting. If you have vomiting, light is supposedly used to treat people with certain symptoms of vomiting after meals.
Don't forget Michael Jackson.
Yeah, there's a host of it. But essentially what he shows here in this book, and there's so many others, is that the pharmaceutical industry is out for profit. It's not particularly interested in maximizing its profit, and it has no real interest in your health. And if the legislators are not checking this, in Canada it's Canada Health, in the United States it's the FDA, there's basically a symbiotic relationship between the legislators, who are paid, much of them, the lobbyists and so forth, and the monies, that really don't check this. And so even if you get a medical system, but I have to back off and say that you're right in the sense that you get really good care in this country. You get the best care you can get practically in the world, perhaps with a few exceptions, the Germans, the Swiss. But that's if you have money. If you don't have money, forget about it. You just go off and die. I mean, it's not, if you've got an illness and you fall in that category where you're not eligible for Medicare or Medicaid, tough cookies. But one of the things that I'd like to address is this flu thing, the swine flu. We've had about for 3 years, a bulk of the doctors who are telling us there's going to be a major epidemic like the 1918 the flu epidemic. And I really do question this whole thing. If you look at, say, it's very important to look at the internet while we have it. As both Reed and Jim have referred to or will, the internet could be shut down anytime there's an emergency. The president has the power, will have the power, or actually it'll come to the CDC, that's the Centers for Disease Control, which will have the power to actually shut down the internet so that you won't really have access to understand what's going on or how to actually treat yourself. And there's I've spoken, I can go on.
I think it's interesting. I did want to insert a little thing there. You mentioned the fact that the legislators are being paid off to make sure that we literally pay a fortune for our drugs. They will not stop that. And a classic example of that is when they set up Part D in Medicare for seniors. The chairman of the committee that wrote that law made sure that, one, there would be no competition. We could not bargain like some of our people do. We could not use the generics in most cases. And thirdly, we had to pay full price for everything. And this is unheard of. They're ripping us off in Medicare. Now, guess what happened to him? Shortly thereafter, he left Congress, walked away with a lot of money, because you can take all your election money. He had millions there. And within weeks, he was hired by one of the major pharmaceutical companies for millions, talking about paying. You'd go to jail if you did that.
Oh yeah, the collusion that exists between the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, one of the things that the right or the conservative, so-called neocons, I think, are saying is that with regard to Well, Jim, you were going to say something, and I just jumped in there.
Well, that's okay. What I want to say about, when we talk about pharmaceuticals, it's the Obama administration that went to the pharmaceuticals and cut this deal. They're supporting a substantial portion of Obamacare with $150 million of promotion, and because they get to keep some monopoly on the way that they have their patent rights on their drugs. And that's one of the problems that I will agree with probably Roy and Reed here today, is the federal legislators, congressmen, and senators are too beholden to the pharmaceutical industry.
Beholden, that means they get paid off?
They get paid off in the form of campaign contributions and everything else. We see Charlie Rangel now all of a sudden has $3 million in assets and bank accounts that nobody knew about. And those type of deals are just unholy. What we need is to make sure that capitalism and competition open up. And what everybody likes to do, whether it's pharmaceuticals or insurance companies, they like to go to their state legislators or federal people and try to write rules and regulations to prevent competition. In the United States today, we have 1,300 insurance companies, and I believe, as many do, that we need to have more competition between the insurance companies. And you should be able to buy your health insurance just like your car insurance, over state lines, without a lot of the mandates that are necessarily put in for different types of coverages. Each state is, again, trying to protect different health care providers. And the big issue that that won't be addressed in H.R. 3200, which is the new federal plan for government-run health care, is tort reform. They will not take on the trial attorneys, which amounts to tens and hundreds of billions of dollars a year.
Okay, we have a phone call. You want to take one?
Sure.
Okay, good morning, caller. Thank you for waiting.
Good morning. The Medicare that's in our system presently is working very, very well, and I think that's a good example that we can always use to draw on when we think about an ideal system that doesn't include the insurance companies taking 35% off the top.
Well, remember, caller, not just Medicare, but we have Medicare, Medicaid, veterans, and the Child's Acts and so forth. About almost a third of America is already on socialized medicine.
Yes. I'd like to give a personal example of having visited Canada and going into a clinic and paying $50 over the counter to the doctor after waiting about 15 minutes. I'm not talking about one of the major cities. I wanted to say that my experience is directly the opposite of what Mr. Caflisch mentioned about CT scanners and MRIs, because as an American citizen, I was able to walk into a clinic and in 2 days have a CT scan on one occasion, and 6 months later walk into the same clinic and within 3 days have an MRI scan. It cost me $400 over the counter to do that. You would never get that done in this country for that kind of money. And then I submitted it to my American insurance, and they paid me back. So that's one personal experience that indicates that the shortage that he says is the case in Canada was not true. I can't speak for people who go to a crowded area like Toronto, but in the rural areas, you have access to those things. They're sitting there and they're available, and they are available to Americans if they want to use them.
Caller, I wanted to mention, a lot of people are not aware, I belong to an HMO, and we had two kinds of care, and Canada does too. One is called urgent care, meaning that if you are in real trouble, you need immediate services, you get them. The other one is routine care. And like I use my ear. I came in one time and said to the clinic and said I have a little trouble hearing out of my left ear, and they said, okay, we'll set you up for hearing tests, and they did. And it took about 2 months though. And my people said, well, you got to wait that long? I said, well, they're busy. And another time I went into the same clinic and I said, I'm having trouble with my ear. I think I have an infection or something because it hurts like hell. Within seconds, I was in a doctor's office. He tested me and sent the test down to their own lab, and they had a prescription in my hand within an hour. That's the other kind of care, and we often confuse the two kinds of care. If you can wait, you may have to wait a while, but if you have something like you need urgent surgery or something, even in Canada, you do get that. And I wanted to mention, New York Times said that they did a recent poll in Canada, because everybody's saying everybody hates it. 96% of the Canadians said they're very happy with the system.
They're happy with it, but, you know, it's got major problems, and the problems are it's still pharmaceutical run. So if for
Yeah.
every ill, there's